Well, welcome everyone to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Tom Perez. I am the founder and CEO of Epic Project, and I'm really glad to have you here for this conversation. The Masculine Wilderness ultimately is a podcast about how men can show up in the world in the healthiest version of themselves. But one of the things I have learned personally, I've learned it professionally, I've learned it within this movement, is that men can't show up and be the best of themselves as men without women, without friends and mentors and leaders. And my guest today is one such individual, Tina Taylor Sims. We were both at a conference. We met about a year ago now, I think. And I watched someone stand up and give I've been to many, many conferences over the years, and I've heard many lived experience experts and just activists in general get up and share from their heart. And none of them had any greater impact on me than when I heard Tina stand up and share her story and her challenge. So Tina, welcome. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, where you reside right now, and maybe just a little bit about your work. And there's a whole bunch of different things we can kind of dive into from there.
So, I have been taught that it's important to introduce who my family is first. And so my grandmother was the Surrey Agnes Baker Pilgrim. We say the Surrey because it's like in a way they're gone. And my father was the Surrey Keith Taylor. And so I'm an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Oregon. I'm Tututni, Shasta, Tillamook, and we were the Tacoma people. And they actually reside in the Lower Rogue area. That's where we originated from. And then we were moved to Siletz. So that was our Trail of Tears. I work here in Humboldt County. I live here in Humboldt County with my husband, and I have family here, kids and grandkids. I run an organization called EPI. It stands for Empower, Protect, and Invest. That is an umbrella organization. I have talked about starting my own organization. I actually just got an EIN number for it, and that's about as far as I am right now.
Yeah, it's definitely not glamorous, I can tell you that.
So I'll take all the pointers I can get.
Yeah. So in the work that you're doing, so for folks that are not from the West Coast or the Northwest, really, like this is Northern California, extreme South, Western Oregon. So
here's the deal. When I tell people I live in Northern California, automatically people think, oh, San Francisco?
You're from Marin County?
Yeah, no, not like I'm 6 hours north of San Francisco. I can drive to Brookings, which is in the Oregon border, and probably 45 minutes to an hour.
So it's the California-Oregon border. Some of those beautiful landscape anywhere.
It is known as the Emerald Triangle, Humboldt County.
Yes, Humboldt County, home of the Humboldt State. Is it the banana slug?
Well, it is no longer Humboldt State University. It is Cal Poly Humboldt.
Oh, Cal Poly. Okay. Oh, but they still have the banana slugs. Okay, good. That was always such a cool mascot. So slimy one, but a cool one. Well, tell us a little bit about your work. What is the kind of the focus for you?
So, in the community in which I live in, when I moved here, I seen that trafficking was happening here, and I moved here specifically to take care of my father. And I would bring him dinner at night. And this one night, he said, oh, I'm in a rush. I'm on my way to a board meeting. And he asked me to leave the dinner there. And so my father was retired law enforcement. And so when I went back the next day, I asked him, Dad, what kind of board meeting you have? And he said, oh, I went to the Human Rights Commission. And I said, oh, what do they do there? And so I have to give you the background. His show came on, and so I couldn't talk to him. So whenever the show's on, you can't talk.
Gotta wait.
Yeah. And then, the commercial came on and I was able to talk. And so he told me that, they're about human justice, right? And I said, so could I present like human trafficking there? And he was like, do you think that's going on here? And I said, absolutely, I do.
Wow.
And so at the time, because my father was alive, I stayed in the background. So I brought some people up from Southern California who presented, but I have to tell you how the conversation went. I said, yes, Dad, I think that's happening here. And he says, oh, yeah, you could do that. And I said, well, how would I do that? And he says, well, first you talk to the chairperson, and then the chairperson would talk to the board, and then we put you on the agenda. And I said, okay. Then his show came back on. And so the commercial came, and I said, Dad, how do I get an audience with this chairperson? He said, you're talking to him. And
But
so,
you got to wait till the next commercial, right?
So anyway, the first ever anti-trafficking awareness conference, would you say, happened here in Humboldt County at that time. And I had other people come and present because we live in a really small community, and it's not that it's not that my dad didn't know what had happened to me, because I am a survivor.
Yeah.
But I wanted to keep his honor. And not only that, in a Native community, they can be, I just didn't want him to be ashamed or what have you. So I waited until he passed away, and then I stepped out and I started doing direct services. I would tell people that I was available. And so people started coming to me, and sometimes I'd help people. I'd drive them myself out of the county if they were stuck here, try not to put anybody in hotel rooms. And then I realized that we needed a hotline here. And so I had a bunch of different organizations, because I seen an organization over here doing a dance and an organization over here doing a dance, but I didn't see anybody dancing together. So I started what was called a community collaboration, where different voices are at the table, whether it's law enforcement, whether it was social service department, Seroptimists. They're nationally always supporting anti-trafficking work. Had Seroptimists at the table, North Coast Rape Crisis, Humboldt Domestic Violence, and just an array of different voices. And it took several years, but all of a sudden people started dancing together. And so with the help of them, we launched a hotline where it's specific for individuals who just need to talk, or if they need some help right now, right? And so we have a hotline and then a drop-in center. And the drop-in center, the vision for it was to have a television in the back of the drop-in center with a loop playing of different survivors. Because the biggest barrier that I run into, and that I also experienced, is that nobody believes that they're a victim of being trafficking. Like maybe your picker is broken men, or you're doing this to survive, right? And it's your fault. Nobody understands that somewhere along the way, force, fraud, or coercion happened, and that's how they got into that, right? And so, because ultimately, no little 5-year-old says, when I want to be a prostitute, right?
Right.
Somewhere along the way, they want to be veterinaries or maybe doctors or whatever, what have you. And they somewhere have been, coddled, coerced, lied to, and they came to that place, right? And so I provide those services by answering the phone, having them in the drop-in center. And so back to what I was saying is that I never knew what was happening to me. And 90% of the individuals that come into the drop-in center don't know. But if they see somebody's story that they can relate to, then they'll be like, "That's happening to me."
What was that story for you? What was that point where you finally went, wait a minute, this is...
So I had been out of the life for 2 years, and I heard about a lady who was doing street outreach in the town in which I was trafficked at. And I said, and because I was still living there, and I went to her and I said, I should go with you because I can introduce you to people out there. Like I can bridge that gap, because not a lot of people are going to talk to you, and she said, really? You should come to this meeting. And so she brought me to this meeting that she was part of, where it was kind of like my community collaboration, but it was called CASE, Coalition Against Exploitation. And so we went to CASE, and I had been there a couple times, and there was people talking about different cases that were happening. And one day they told my story about an individual that they were helping. And I was like, wait, you mean that's what's happening to me? And so, or what had happened to me? And the day that I realized that I didn't have to take 100% responsibility for the life that I had lived was probably the most freeing moment of my life.
Wow.
Um,
So at that moment, kind of that epiphany, you had been out of the life for a little bit, but you still hadn't. I think that's such, I've heard that story so often. I think a lot of people kind of on the periphery of this issue don't really understand that it's not folks that are exploited. Anybody else that is a victim of crime intuitively understands they're a victim of criminal activity. But it's such a different story for survivors. That's such a common thing. I am fascinated by that. I want to go back to another part of what you're sharing earlier. Your collaborative mojo. I don't know what else to call it. But it seems to come from a really personal space. Like that's something that seemed like inherent, like in you. Like this is how community should work. Where did that come from? With just the sense of we need to do this together. We need to dance together. Where does that come from?
I like to think that one of my skill sets is a connector, kind of like the networker, but the connector. Hey, you should meet this person.
Yeah.
You should meet that person. And I know that we can do more together. There's no I in team, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a while to build a collaboration because, especially when you live in a small community and people are fighting for grants and, this type of stuff. We ran a really big campaign here in the community and there were so many people that said they wanted their name this way and they wanted their name on there and this person wanted their name on there. And at the end, I finally got a little frustrated and was like, this is about the individual who's being trafficked, not whose name could be on. I get it, right?
Yeah.
So it took a long time for collaboration to happen, but it had happened and and it's beautiful now. And I don't know where I got that from, except that I'm a team player.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it comes from that very, very personal place. You are in Humboldt County, it's a rural, kind of remote region. I've always described it because I love riding motorcycles in that area. It's like it's on the way to nowhere, particular, But how do you respond? Because I've heard this often from people in different places around the country, especially from rural areas, when they say that kind of stuff only happens in the big city. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that?
I had a colleague who said it best. And I don't curse, but she had overheard someone say that they come to this place because it's rural. They don't come to this area just for the green weed, but for the green females. And others, in other words, those who are most vulnerable and have no idea what's going on. And so with that, we went on an education campaign.
Do you find people in the community who might be good allies, are they reluctant to believe the prevalence of exploitation even in rural areas?
Initially, yes. Today, it's ironic because I do this work outside of my 8 to 5, right?
Right.
And prior to me having an 8 to 5, like I would educate people on a regular basis. And we've been educating the community now for at least 8 years, maybe 9. And I still run into people that say, do you really think that's happening here?
Yeah.
And, however, the nice thing is that there's enough education and the word of mouth is starting to spread that creating abolitionists is starting to happen. Right.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It just seems like such a stubborn tendency. And I suppose I understand it because people, especially in smaller communities, generally speaking, are very proud of their community and they want to believe that it's a safe place for everyone. So I was mistaken. I think we were talking earlier about your Indigenous background and that we haven't had, you may have been the first one. We actually didn't. We had Jenny Footle, who was on earlier. I don't know if you've ever crossed paths. She's in Colorado. But I wanted to talk about something that I know is connected. I've learned from you. I've learned from other Indigenous survivor leaders. But the overlap between the murdered and missing Indigenous people movement, and maybe if you could say a little bit about that, because it's bigger than just commercial sexual exploitation, but the vulnerabilities that are inherent in some of those communities that just lead to all kinds of really gnarly things. But can you shed a little light on that?
Sure. So I'm a firm believer that you can't talk about MMIW without talking about trafficking, or vice versa. You can't talk about trafficking without talking about MMIW. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of colonialism, right? Even back then, there was an exploitation that would happen even of the land, right? Moving people from one area to another, and then exploiting those individuals on the way and or when they got somewhere. So today, unfortunately, when you get a bunch of different reservations or federally recognized tribes, they're a sovereign nation, right? And so a person who's non-native can go to the reservation and take a girl off of there, or they even rape her there, and they cannot be persecuted on the reservation. So, but you take a native off the reservation into the city and they commit a crime there, they can be persecuted in the city as well as on the reservation. And so what that does is it opens up avenues for traffickers, exploiters, perpetrators, whatever that is, to understand now that there's a place where they're exempt. And
and so you got a whole communities of people that are just sitting ducks in a lot of ways. Does anybody know? Let me ask it this way: does anybody that you've come across have any clear picture of the scope of murdered and missing Indigenous women? I've talked with survivors in Canada and in the States. Does anybody have a sense of the scope of it at this point?
So I want to say this as gently as possible. Let's say you go missing, right?
Right.
The possibility that your disappearance goes nationwide, it's going to be huge, right? However, if I go missing, you'd be lucky if you see people spreading it on Facebook. And so, unfortunately, the statistics are really blurred. There's
because of that bias.
And or people being non-identified.
Our first guest when we started the podcast a year ago was Elizabeth Smart from Salt Lake City area. And she even brought that up. She goes, I forget exactly how she said it, but I was a young white girl and the whole world was paying attention. And she acknowledged that kind of the same thing you did. There's, how many young Indigenous women and girls go missing? What do you have any, formal, organizational connection to that network? That's the best way I can describe it, because it's not one organization that's really out there trying to make a difference in that space. But do you have any ongoing connection with any groups that are specifically focused on that, on bringing attention to it?
On data collection and stuff like that. Yeah. There's an organization called Sovereign Bodies Institute that's doing that work. But she's been working on it for quite a while and still doesn't have a clear picture.
Yeah. It's because no one's paid attention all these, centuries, decades for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about just some of the inherent vulnerabilities that exist in Indigenous communities? I can imagine what they are from just having read and talked with enough people, but I wonder if are there some misconceptions? about.
There is misconceptions. One of the things that, first, let me be transparent and tell you that I'm still learning because I wasn't raised Native. Even though that made me vulnerable, I was raised with my mother who was non-Native. And I didn't realize at the time I went to a Just conference and I heard Christine Stark talk about how vulnerable not only are individuals with disabilities, but also Native people. And what you can't see here is that I have a disability, right? So that made me double vulnerable. And so what I'm sharing is stuff that I've learned as I go. Unfortunately, I didn't get to learn from my dad as much as I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so, some of the vulnerabilities, first of all, are language. Like if a female is raped or taken it, well, she was on drugs and it was the clothes that she was wearing.
Yeah.
She's just one of those people, right?
Right.
Whether she's using drugs or what have you. And so the fact that a lot of times, tribes are known to have a plethora of drugs and alcohol even in Oregon, one of the things that has happened a lot is the Indian children are being removed and placed in foster homes like 5 times more than the average individual. And so then you already have like compound trauma, like historical trauma, right?
Right.
Intergenerational trauma. But then you get a young kid that's removed from the home and put in foster care.
And that's like happening now. That's wow.
And so that's compounded and they get put in foster care. And then that makes them even more vulnerable to being trafficked because what happens, there's needs and vulnerabilities that an individual is going to say, I can provide that for them, right?
Yeah. It's doubly, I think it's like doubles or compounds the vulnerability, though, that scenario. What do you see, what have you seen in Indigenous communities that is a factor that can create or that is creating resilience in kids? Like, are there qualities that are unique to those communities? Like, what are some of those things that if we could continue to nurture those things would build up more resilience for Indigenous youth?
100%. The connection to, first, I'm the first one to tell you that I'm a believer, but I also believe that just having a relationship or being a believer is not what saved me. It was the fact that I connected back to culture, right?
Yeah.
And connecting to those traditional healing methods that natives had, years and years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so here in this area, they're doing a really great job at, having cultural events. Maybe there's some beading groups. Maybe they're doing some youth like get together where youth are learning how to collect mussels. One of the things that I like to talk about is that natives were removed from the land in which they started. And so being connected back to that land, right, is one of the things that is really healing, and learning maybe to speak some parts of their language. And so that connection, being part of, right? I'm a firm believer that it's because I connected back to culture that I sit with you today with over 17 years of sobriety.
That's so good. I love that. And you shared a little bit more of that when I first heard you speak too. And it's like, just you struck me as a rooted person. Like there's just some roots. There's some depth. What else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm a firm believer that God wouldn't allowed me to be born Native American if it was such a sin, right?
There you go.
And so I know that, it goes hand in hand.
What other customs from your particular culture were especially meaningful just as part of your healing and they really deepen that connection for you? Were there other things that you talked about beading, but?
So for me, I have 111 tattoos on my chin. But the process working up to that was, I talked to my grandmother who had it, who had them, and I asked her what the meaning was. And for all tribes, it's different. There's 574 different federally recognized tribes. You can't know what each meaning is, right?
Right.
And that doesn't include the non-federally recognized tribes. But I asked my grandma about hers, and I said, well, can I get mine? And no, I said, how do I get mine? And she said, well, first you need permission. And anyways, I seen her later, and I was like, well, Grandma, would I be able to? And she said, oh, you're in a good life. You can do that. But you see, I had the committee in my head. So the committee in my head told me I wasn't dark enough. I didn't know enough. I hadn't been around culture long enough.
Yeah.
And so she gave me permission, and then 2 years later passed away.
Oh, wow.
And then about 4 years or 5 years afterwards, I was out jogging and I was thinking about getting them. Again, that committee was going in my head telling me that, I didn't know enough and I didn't belong enough, right? And it's almost as though my grandma came alongside of me, and I heard her just as plain as day. And she said, you go to church to get ready. You don't get ready, then go to church. I said, okay, Grandma. And so I had the honor of attending 2 other people who got their one-on-ones prior to me having that encounter. And so I invited them to mine when I set my date. And so when they came, one of them said, what's your mantra? I said, I need a mantra. She said, oh, yeah, you need a mantra. She said, because that's what's going to be seared into your head while you're getting this 111.
Is that to help manage the pain of the process?
Well, ironically, it was.
Yeah.
And let me get to that. So my mantra was, I belong and that I'm enough, right? And so as they were doing it, as long as I was saying that continually in my head, I belong, right? It was fine, but I could tell when I stopped saying it in my head and start thinking about other things, because then I, switch up and it'd start hurting, and then my eyes would get all, So definitely the mantra was, I belong. And so today, that was part of my healing, you know.
That is such a powerful thing, because one of the things that we have learned in dealing with the other side of this equation and dealing with men who are purchasing sex, active sex buyers, and in conversations, it doesn't happen with everyone, but often the conversations can go to a place where these men admit that they're isolated, they're alone, and in a way they're saying kind of just the opposite of what you were saying. It's like, I have nowhere to belong. And so the cheap and destructive alternative to that feeling of not belonging is to exploit another person. And it's such a irony, sad irony in some ways. But I want to be clear too, for the folks that are listening, because most of the folks will just be listening to this. The 111s are they're vertical tattoos that go from your lower lip to down your chin. Is that is the 111? I mean, is that the normal name for it? Is
nickname? No, each tribe has a word for it for their tribe.
Yeah,
the just universal English word for it is 111.
111. Yeah. Well, as soon as you said it, like, oh yeah, I totally get that. That's really helpful. I love that though. That there is something incredibly powerful and healing and potent about belonging and about feeling that strength of connection. Have you had similar experiences in other tribal communities? I mean, I know each tribal community is not one kind of monolithic block of people. There are, like you said, hundreds of sovereign nations, but this ethic or ethos of belonging, is that a fairly common experience as you've been in other communities? Do you sense that, or is it hard to tell?
I don't know if I'm getting the question.
Just that the quality of, or the sense of knowing that you belong to a community, to a culture, and that's something that builds resilience when you engage with other Indigenous communities. Does that exist elsewhere too?
Let me share this with you. I want to go back to my experience. I started connecting with culture inside the iron walls, right? And I remember one time the spiritual advisor that came, he said, we don't speak English in the sweat lodge, because I was going to sweat lodge, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I guess I'm not going to be talking because I don't know my language. Yeah. And he said, you could borrow mine until you learn yours. And so he began teaching me his language. And even today, I still know a little bit more of that than my own language. I'm working on that, though. Yeah. And so I can say that I borrowed other people's culture or words until I got to where I can learn a little bit of my own, right? Yeah. And I have heard over and over again in the Native community, I don't know enough about my culture, but the fact that the community is embracing each other and coming together and learning what they can, 100% provides to the resilience that the members have, right?
Yeah, that's so good. I have some sense of that. I'm half Cuban. My father grew up in rural Cuba, so I never really knew that part of my family. But every time I've ever encountered a Cuban person, it seems like they're just that, and I'm quick to say, hey, my father's from Cuba, and this happened like just a few months ago at a restaurant. The hostess was Cuban, and you could tell the moment you saw her. And I said that, and she was, we just connected, and it felt so warm and appropriate and healthy. And although my wife nudged me when she's going, here comes your girlfriend, she's got more chips for you. But it was that kind of, just warm and supportive and affectionate connection. So I when you talk about it, like it triggers something in me. It's like, I want more of that,
And quite frankly, the area in which I live in isn't where I'm enrolled at, right?
Right.
This community 100% has embraced me. And although like some of the tribes here are kind of like cousins to the tribe where I'm from.
Right.
There's similarities, but there's a lot of differences. But
right.
They've embraced me. They've taught me their way. And so while I'm living here, I'm learning to do things that I didn't know before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. So on that note, just, how can people, kind of back to just people in general that want to be a part of this work and ending exploitation, and how can non-Indigenous people demonstrate like really tangible support for the MMIW issue? The fear of cultural appropriation, I think sometimes if it just feels so daunting, it kind of feels paralyzing. It's like, I don't want to say anything that would be offensive, so I don't say anything at all. And I'm not sure that's is that the best thing? But how can folks like me, like a lot of our Epic guys that I know listen to this, like what can we do to support this work and to continue to draw attention to it?
So what I'm getting ready to tell you isn't even from me. I heard this from Chief O'Rourke, and he was also talking about cultural competency, right? Being culturally informed, right? And so he said, I cannot tell you how to be culturally informed because there's 574 different tribes. Like, I don't know all 574 different tribes, not including the non-federally recognized tribes, right? The best thing that I can tell you is to be willing to ask questions. And so how you just asked, that is okay. I don't want to disrespect. I want to come in a humble way. How do I do this? Is it okay if I do that, right?
Yeah.
Be willing to ask questions and to be okay with it. Asking questions is being culturally competent or culturally informed, right?
You have so many good just mic drop moments. Like you just come up with these. That's so helpful, super helpful. And it was not what I was expecting, and I really appreciate the clarity of it. That's so good. You said something else when I heard you speak the first time last spring in Ashland, and I've spent probably more time than I could recall in football locker rooms listening to coaches try to give motivational pregame speeches, and you talked towards the end of your presentation. You had a line, and you were admonishing the audience to stay in this work because it's not going to be solved overnight. It's going to take all of us, all of our lives, really, to make a difference. You talked about going long and going deep. Can you riff a little bit on what that means, where it comes from? And it was such a powerful moment.
Sometimes dealing with individuals who have been trafficked isn't always easy, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes dealing with individuals who maybe are addicted to drugs isn't always easy. Right. But to be willing to continue to go, and you're going to go long, right? Yeah. That individual might steal from you. They might break your trust. They might do some things, right? That continually over again, you get disappointed. But that's when you go deep, and you go deep and you continue treading water. And you tell yourself that you may not see the seeds or the fruit of the seeds that you plant, right? But because you went long and you went deep and you continue to keep going, no matter it's in the work or if it's working one-on-one with individuals in direct service, right? I would say continue to go. Even when it looks like maybe nothing's happening and individuals are still being trafficked, right? But if you continue to go, your job is to just keep doing the work. Go long and go deep.
It's when I first heard you talk about that, it was so clarifying and encouraging for me because it spoke to a way that I want to continue to show up and do this work, and I would presume to speak for virtually all of the men that I know in this work, not just in Epic, but anybody doing anything good as a man in this work. Like we all recognize it is a long game, and so it's just to hear you say it with such authority. So I go back to the locker room, like, yes, coach, let's go. But I also know, we don't solve this problem overnight. We don't solve this problem by, pretending to be, some kind of action hero bad guy, and we're going to go and, punish the bad guy. And like, it's so deep and so systemic in our culture that that's not the solution. And sadly, I've seen a lot of guys come and go because they weren't willing to do exactly what you said. They didn't, for whatever reason, and I don't say it out of spite or anything, but they didn't have it in them to go long and go deep. And I just think there's just such wisdom in that. I'm just really, I'm really grateful for that. And that that was a great weekend at the Disruptors Summit, which is coming up again. But that was for me, honestly, that was like the best part of a really good weekend, just that when you got up there and shared that. So I'm really grateful. I want to know, just for you at this season of life, I mean, you're doing hard work. It's just, it's a grind every day. Like, what for you at this season of your life has been life-giving? Outside of work, is it the just connection, people? Like what gives you life, gives you energy, puts gas in your tank?
For me, it's exercise. And I'm not consistent at it, but when
am I.
When I do, not only does it give me clarity of thought, but I just feel better afterwards, right? And of course, I have a really great job that pays for massages, so I go and get those too.
There you go. That's great. You talked earlier about just the feeling a connection to a place and to nature, and that's I think it's similar to my experience in exercise. It's not just the exercise, it's the sense of, I don't know, I think for me, it helps keep my perspective clear. Like I'm a small thing in a very large world. And I have found that to be a really helpful thing as a man.
But that small thing can make a really huge ripple effect.
There you go. Yes. I love that. It is our custom to give our guests the final word. And I'm going to ask this last question just selfishly, but what encouragement would you offer men who look at this issue of exploitation, whether just in general or if they're looking at the MMIW issue, specifically, but what encouragement and wisdom can you share with men who care but don't exactly know how to get involved? What would be your...
The person I give credit to for believing in me and mentoring me and bringing me to where I am today was a man. He knew my whole entire story, and he knew that all I wanted to do was run a marathon. And so he didn't run the marathon for me, but he came alongside me and he helped me connect with people that would buy me shoes because I didn't have any money when I got out. All I wanted to do was run a marathon. And so somebody came alongside him to come alongside me, and they bought me shoes. And then there was people on each side of me who offered to pay for the entry into my first marathon race, right? Who also offered to pay the hotel in which you stay the night before, because you get up at the butt crack of dawn, and to run a marathon. And so what I would say is be that positive influence, because if you're not, then what you're doing is you're leaving somebody vulnerable to have someone else fill that need, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to fill that positive need. Come alongside individuals. They don't need you to carry them. They don't need you to walk for them. They just need you to come alongside them so they can get over the finish line.
So good. Tina Taylor Sims, you are an elder in this work, and I'm just really, really grateful for you. And I would just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thank you.